Hello there and welcome back to my channel, or if this is the first video of mine you are seeing, then welcome. I wanted to sit down today and talk about 10 plus palettes that I pulled from my collection that I feel are perfect for the winter time and the holiday season. So if all of that sounds interesting, then let's go ahead and get started. Okay, I'm going to be starting with the drugstore eyeshadow palettes first, and then I'll move on over to high-end, and then I have one palette from an indie brand. I'll have timestamps listed for you below in case you want to skip around. But first, I want to mention this little palette from ColourPop. This is the Out All Night eyeshadow palette. And of course, I will be popping up some swatches and everything for you on the screen while I'm talking about these palettes. I just think there's something so special about this palette, and maybe it's because I don't have a lot of palettes with this color scheme in my personal collection. I just really love these pretty gray tones, these silver tones. I think this would be beautiful with like a white sweater like I'm wearing today, or like even a pretty gray sweater. I can just see this being the most beautiful palette to create a holiday look, like whether you're going to a party or something. There's something about it, and I wanted to include it. This is available right now. Probably after the holidays, I guess they might discontinue it, which is sad. They really should make this permanent. But right now it's available at Target and of course also on ColourPop's website. It comes in a set with a creme gel liner. The one that came with this one is a black shade. But I wanted to mention this palette. I just feel like it's just a pretty palette overall, and I think it's perfect for the holidays. Okay, the next palette I want to talk about. Now, unfortunately, this palette is no longer available. It was limited edition, and this is the e.l.f. Cookies and Dreams eyeshadow palette. I just thought of this palette immediately because it has these pretty, more blue tones, and this is like a blue-black shade. And then you have this row right here of just the neutrals where you can do a pretty neutral look if you want to, and then you could also do a pretty blue look. This is perfect for the winter time. I just think it's perfect for the holidays. I can just definitely see this being just an overall well-rounded palette for this time of the year. And I do love that you have some neutral shades and then the blues where you can do one or the other depending on your mood for the day or whatever you're doing. I know that I've used this palette a couple of times and the quality is really amazing. Really the same amazing quality that I kind of expect now from e.l.f.'s eyeshadow palettes, and I wish it was still available, but I mean, of course, there are plenty of blue palettes out there that are equally just as good. I just had this one in my collection, so I did want to bring it back out during this time of the year because I think this is a perfect time to be wearing this palette. This next palette is one that I definitely had to mention. I think this is one of my most favorite releases from the drugstore this year, and this is the ColourPop 1111 eyeshadow palette. This palette is so absolutely stunning. I love these tones like this, and I just think with these types of colors you can get such a beautiful glam makeup look, and you could also probably tone it down with just some lighter shades as well if you wanted to go a little bit more softer for the day. But these shimmer shades are absolutely beautiful, and I have several other options with similar color schemes that I'm going to be mentioning soon, but if you want a more affordable option with this type of color scheme, definitely this one. I think this is one of the most lovely palettes that ColourPop has. Definitely a favorite for sure of mine from them, and I can just look at this right now and just think of all the pretty holiday looks you can create with this. And you even have this really pretty white sparkly shade up here at the top. It definitely reminds me of the sweater I'm wearing, so I had to include this one for sure. And it's not a holiday palette video if I don't mention the ColourPop and Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer eyeshadow palette. This is definitely the ultimate holiday palette. We have these pretty reds in this palette, we have these pretty greens, and then of course we have all these pretty neutral tones as well where you can create a simple look too if you were looking for it, but then you also have these beautiful pops of traditional colors that you see around this time of the year, like these pretty cranberries, the greens. I just think this is an overall well-rounded palette. The formula is of course amazing. It's one of my favorites for this year that I've tried too. I think this is such a beautiful palette. I'm glad that they brought it back this year. I know this palette originally launched last year, but I never picked it up and I kind of regretted that I didn't. So when they brought it back this year and I found it at my local Target, I knew I had to have it. Excellent quality overall, and another really nice affordable option to have during this time of the year. I only have 4 with the drugstore palettes, so I'm going to be moving on to the more higher end palettes. And the first one I wanted to mention, I just think this palette would be perfect for adding like little topper shades, and that is the Moondust Space Rider palette from Urban Decay. It has these really pretty sparkly topper shades. Of course, it has the famous Space Cowboy shade that I know a lot of people really love. I just think this would be absolutely perfect. Like maybe you just want to throw a bronzer in your crease on your lid and then add one of these pretty sparkly topper shades on top. I think that would be so beautiful, and that's why I wanted to mention this palette. I think topper shades would be absolutely stunning for this time of the year, as well as the winter time as well. Just have that glittery effect, like, you know, like you're looking at snow glittering. I think about things like that. But I wanted to mention this palette. I think this is such a nice palette. I really love the colors in this one. I know they have another one. I believe that one has a little more color to it. This one's more of the neutral. I'm not sure if I want to pick the other one up or not, but I am glad that I have this one. I think this would be perfect just for those pretty toppers, and I've gotten really more into those lately, so I did wanted to mention this one for sure. And the next palette I wanted to mention is the one that I'm wearing in today's video. This is the Too Faced Natural Eyes eyeshadow palette. Okay, unfortunately this little palette wants to reflect pretty badly in like my mirror and of course my ring light glaring off of it, but I just think this is such a beautiful, well-rounded palette. I love the formula in here, and it does have like a really nice sweet scent to it. Kind of reminds me of the Tarte eyeshadow palettes, how they kind of have that sweet scent to them. This palette does as well, and I just think the shades in here are nice. But you have this whole top row here of mattes, and then you have another matte shade right here as well where you can just create looks, and then the rest are these really beautiful shimmers. I think some of these little more darker shades over here, like this shade, is more of kind of like a matte with shimmer in it. I just think there's something special about this formula. I think it's really easy. Okay, I'm going to have to put it out of frame because it's glaring really badly. I think it's such an easy palette to work with. It's easy to blend. It's easy to work with. You don't even have to spray your brush for the shimmer shades. They go on beautifully all by themselves. I think that this is a really lovely palette if you're someone who maybe you're more of a beginner, or maybe you want a palette that is really easy to blend. I think this is a perfect option. That's why I wanted to mention it. I've been wearing it a ton lately when I'm not filming or when I'm not doing looks for Instagram. I really do like this palette. I think that it's really nice quality. Honestly, I think it's one of my favorite palettes from Too Faced that I have tried for sure. So I wanted to mention it for that reason. And of course, I'm a sucker for that packaging because it's pink and gold, and pink and gold are some of my favorites. You can see it definitely in my background behind me with my unicorns. Pink and gold are my favorites. So I definitely wanted to mention this one. I think it has a really nice formula. These next two palettes that I'm going to mention, they are very similar to each other, but I want to mention them both because I definitely will be using both of them during this time of the year and for many, many years to come because they are some of my favorites. The first one is the Makeup by Mario Ethereal Eyes eyeshadow palette. I am so happy that I got this palette this year. I know it was originally launched last year and I missed out on it and I was so sad about it, so when he announced it was coming back this year, I quickly grabbed it because I didn't want to miss out again. This is a beautiful palette. It should be made permanent for sure, and it has more of these really beautiful like topper, really sparkly, wet looking eyeshadows in here, and I really love that, especially for this time of the year. Can you just imagine being at a party and maybe the lights are a little dim and you can just see your eyeshadow sparkling? That's what I think of when I look at this palette, and I had to include it. I think it's simply beautiful. If it was something you were looking at and you were looking to splurge, I don't think you'd be disappointed at all with the quality. I really love it. I had to mention it in this video because it is one I'm going to be wearing for sure. I adore it, and the formula is really easy to work with as well. And all of these palettes I'm mentioning, by the way, there's no muddying, creasing, fading, or anything like that with all of these palettes. They're all really stunning quality. That's why they're definitely in this video. And the next one is the other one that is very similar, and that is the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude eyeshadow palette. I know that this palette has been everywhere. Everyone is talking about this palette, and with good reason. It is such a beautiful, stunning palette. Every look I've created with it, I have loved and adored. And it also has some of these more sparkly, topper, wet-looking shades in it as well, and I really love that. Perfect for this time of the year. I definitely had to mention this palette, and I think it's one that if anybody was looking at it that they haven't picked it up yet but were considering it, I definitely would recommend it. I think you would really truly love it. It's just a simple palette. I think it's perfect, of course, for this time of the year, but for all year round because you can create such beautiful neutral looks. You can also kind of, you know, glam it up a little bit as well if you want something a little more intense. You know, have this shade in here as well, and then some of these darker shimmer shades too that you can be working with. Just an excellent palette overall. This is just one of my favorites. Probably, I would say, might be my #1 palette of the year. I'm not sure yet. I'm sure I'll be trying a few more palettes before the year is over, but I really love this palette. It definitely had to be in this video. Also, I'm not sure what's going on with my lighting. I feel like it keeps, I guess because I'm holding these palettes up, it keeps turning me kind of orangey looking. So if that keeps happening in the video, I am so sorry about that. There's something just, I don't know. I guess my light's just not wanting to focus on me that well, but the next palette I want to mention is, of course, I feel like a lot of people love this palette. This is the Natasha Denona Glam Eyeshadow Palette. I think this palette is definitely one that is perfect for this time of the year. It just has these really beautiful shimmer shades in it. I mean, I favor this palette more so for the shimmers than I do the mattes. The mattes are lovely. I have no issue with the mattes, but these shimmer shades, they're so stunning. Like if you just want a simple look where if you don't even want to use the mattes in the palette, you just grab your bronzer, throw that in your crease or on your lid, and then top it with one of these shimmers. So beautiful. And I love that there's so many options for shimmer shades in this palette, and I love to shimmer and sparkle and glitter, especially for the holidays. I feel like that is definitely the best time to do so. And that's definitely one reason why I had to include this palette. I just think it's perfect with those shimmer formulas. This palette is really stunning. I can see why this is a definite favorite for many people. It's beautiful. Alright, this next palette is from Odin's Eye. This is the Hey Reindeer eyeshadow palette. Of course I had to include this palette because this palette is actually Christmas themed and with the reindeer and all that. And what I really love about this palette is how just different this color scheme is, especially for this time of the year. I love that you have more of the traditional colors that you would see, like the shades like this or the golds, but then you also have these pretty blue shades in here for the winter time. I just think this is such a beautiful palette. I'm so happy that I picked this palette up. I had to include it. It's definitely a holiday themed palette because I mean even some of the shades have the word Christmas in them, so of course I had to include this. I love this palette so much. I'm so happy that I picked it up. It was my first time trying Odin's Eye and I am just really happy to have it in my collection. It is one I would recommend for sure, especially if you're like me and you love deer because look at the pretty artwork. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is from Huda Beauty. This was last year's, I guess maybe you could say, holiday palette. This was the Empowered palette, and I definitely wanted to mention this one because I feel like it has some really beautiful, rich tones in here that are perfect for this time of the year. I definitely think this is a good option for the holidays because you can create such really beautiful glam looks with this palette. I just think it would be absolutely stunning, especially with some of these more like gold shades, and then you have some of these shades that have a little bit more of like a coppery tone to them, which I think is beautiful for this time of the year. Of course, this is just a really well-rounded palette, and I love that you could create some really pretty smoky, intense looks with this palette as well because you have some of these deeper shades. You also have a cream. I think there's like 2 or 3. I know these 2 are cream shadows, and then I believe this one is as well. It feels like kind of like a cream shimmer shade. I just think that this is such a beautiful palette. I think it's perfect for this time of the year, and I think it's a good companion palette with the palette that I'm about to mention next. So I definitely wanted to include this one for sure. And the next one I wanted to talk about was the new one from this year. This is the Huda Beauty Pretty Grunge eyeshadow palette, and this is really such a stunning eyeshadow palette. It does have a cream in here as well. I do want to mention that. And it is such a stunning, beautiful palette. I think you can create such really pretty smoky looks with this palette. Some really pretty glam looks for any holiday party or any get-together you might be going to. And these shimmer shades are really impactful. They're just beautiful on the lid. I had to include this palette, and I think this would be a really beautiful companion palette with the Empowered one that she put out last year. I just think those two together, if you want to mix and match, I think that would create such a beautiful, effortless look as well. I just had to mention these two palettes. I think Huda Beauty's palettes are definitely palettes that I think of for the holidays, and I guess it's because some of them like these come out during the holiday season, so that's why I always associate them with this time of the year. But I had to include at least 2 of her palettes, and I feel like this one and then the Empowered one are definitely 2 that are perfect for this time of the year. I also think her Naughty Nude palette is perfect as well if you want that one because it has some of those more burgundy reddish tone shades in there as well. I was going to include that one, but I believe I put that one in my fall palette video too, but I mean it could have easily overlapped in this one as well, and that's another one I would recommend for sure. And the last palette I wanted to mention, now this palette is discontinued. This is the Haus Labs Stupid Love eyeshadow palette. I think this is another one that might there we go. And the reason why I wanted to mention this one is because of these blue tones over here. I thought that this would be a really pretty palette to have during the winter. I just can see using these really beautiful shades. I think I actually did include this palette, or at least thought about it in my summer picks because well, it had the warmth and the cool like the ocean. But for this time of the year, I'm more so looking at that side of the palette. Well, if you cover that shade too, I just can see really beautiful winter inspired looks with this half of the palette. Now, I will say that out of all the palettes I am mentioning, this would probably be my least favorite. It's not bad, but it's just not my favorite, but I wanted to include it because I don't have many blue eyeshadow palettes. I only had this one pretty much, and then the one from e.l.f. that I mentioned earlier, so I did want to include this palette for that reason. I definitely wanted to get some more use out of it, so that's another reason why I picked this palette. I think the blues in here are really beautiful. I definitely think of wintertime, the pretty snow, when I see that part of that half of the palette, so I did want to include it as well. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video. I had so much fun putting this video together. I love going through my collection and picking out different palettes. While you can wear any makeup you want any time of the year, all year long, I love also being inspired by the seasons or the holidays. I just think it's just fun to just play around with makeup, just see what inspires you the most for whatever time of the year it might be. And I hope that maybe this will, maybe encourage someone to shop their stash and see what they have that might be holiday related. Maybe you've already done that and I am just way behind. But I do hope that you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, I hope you will please consider leaving a like, a comment, or subscribing if you haven't already, and please make sure to follow me over on Instagram at Jessica Dearly, and I hope to see you in my next video.